Welcome to Beyond Expectations, a podcast where we explore the ideas, people, and innovations shaping the government of tomorrow. No other public recognition exemplifies the best of government service like the Arthur Flemming Award. This podcast highlights recent Flemming Award recipients and the incredible work being done across government today. I am Wagish Bhartia, your host and Chief Growth Officer at REI Systems, a proud sponsor of the Flemming Awards.
Today, I'm joined by Nick McDaniel, former attorney with the U.S. Department of Justice, Environment and Natural Resources Division. Nick led landmark environmental enforcement actions, including the record $1.675 billion Clean Air Act settlement with Cummins, using data, science, and collaboration to drive accountability. His work is shaped by strategic insight and a deep commitment to environmental justice and to communities most impacted by pollution. Nick, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start off real quick and talk about Arthur Flemming Award and its deep principle around fairness to all. Talk to me a little bit about how your work in environmental justice reflects that principle.
Yeah, to me, it really is all about public health and health equity. And maybe even I should take a step back a little bit and explain what the environmental enforcement section does at DOJ. So the environmental enforcement section, we're attorneys enforcing pollution laws, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, laws about hazardous waste sites. We're working with other federal agencies, usually EPA, but other federal agencies too, Fish and Wildlife and Interior Department agencies and even DOD agencies. But when there's a violation of a pollution law, when a facility is emitting pollution at a higher level than their permit allows, or they've had a spill into Lake Michigan of arsenic and cyanide or whatever, EPA works on that investigation. Then they bring in DOJ when they need to do an enforcement action that involves the courts. So, with that context, I worked at DOJ for 11 years, and I really came to think of our job in the Environment Division as one that's really revolves around public health and improving public health outcomes for people, because that's really where the rubber meets the road when it comes to pollution and pollution violations. That's why we care about them. That's why we care about the pollutants that are coming out of the smokestack or out of the outfall. Because it can lead to worse public health outcomes for the communities that live in those areas. So bringing that back to the equity piece, it's just a fact that poorer communities of color are overburdened by pollution. They're disproportionately affected by things like bad air quality, poor water quality, other environmental conditions that impact health and childhood development and all those things. That's just a fact. It's not a controversial statement or even a political statement or anything. It's those burdens of pollution violations more often than not are falling on communities that are poorer and communities of color. So our job at DOJ, when we are trying to get polluters back into compliance, when we're trying to reduce pollution going forward into the future, while working with EPA, the goal that we have in mind while we're doing that is improving air quality, improving water quality for all communities, of course, but we know that the communities that are overburdened and that are going to benefit by a lot of the work that we're doing are going to be communities that are disproportionately impacted by those violations.
Understood. So one of the things you talked about, and you set the context, which was very helpful, EPA and Department of Justice, reflect on perhaps and broaden out from a collaboration between governmental entities or agencies. Doesn't always happen well. Sounds like in these instances and the work you're doing and some of the cases that you've been able to win, that process has been better than most. Can you kind of deconstruct that and what lessons that could perhaps carry forward for other folks in government?
Sure. Yeah. So it is a really collaborative process at DOJ because we're experts at these other agencies. EPA has attorneys too, but EPA has engineers, EPA has scientists, EPA has inspectors that are on the ground out at these facilities and are able to identify compliance problems. They're able to investigate. They're able to build the evidence necessary to enforce in these cases. And so it's a robust collaborative process for DOJ attorneys in the Environment Division to work with these other federal agencies. And I'd say one other thing to note is we also work with states a lot. So it's not just other federal agencies. We're working with state environmental departments and environmental protection agencies, state attorney general's offices, because they have an interest in enforcing against pollution violations in their state also. And so the kinds of cases that we work on at DOJ, by the time it gets to us, lots of times they're pretty complex, big cases, and it really necessitates robust collaboration with your state partners, with your federal agency partners, and so it's a complicated process, but it's the only way to get to comprehensive solutions. If you have to take that kind of holistic approach to enforcing these cases because you want to get from the point that you start at, which is there's a problem. You have a facility that's out of compliance and there's a pollution problem. And again, we're concerned about the public health and environment impacts. You want to get from there to a point at the end where now we're in compliance and we have confidence that going forward, this facility is going to be cleaner and the people in the community are going to be more protected from pollution problems. The only way to get from that point to the end is to have full buy-in and collaboration with all the different players that have a role in both in regulating the facility and then negotiating potentially a settled resolution. So it's a big process with a lot of collaboration. It's actually one of the fun things about doing the job at DOJ in the Environment Division is the chance to work with all these different partners. You get to work with engineers and scientists and fish and wildlife experts. Like you really get a lot of exposure to a lot of different people working in different parts of government. And it's both necessary and fun, I think.
Got it. Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about the Cummins settlement specifically. I think that's one of the largest Clean Air Act penalties in history. If you were to draw lessons that can be applied for government, for industry, and for communities affected by pollution, what would be two or three of those?
Number one is compliance is really important, and I think that's where the big penalty comes into it. Obviously, a big penalty sends a deterrent message to the industry and to others that need to comply with the law that this is something that's really important. Two, I think one thing about the case that I think is a lesson that we can learn and should always keep in mind is that mitigation of past harm is really important too. So the idea is that these trucks were out of compliance and there was excess NOx pollution. We care about NOx because it can lead to smog and other sorts of air pollution that can exacerbate asthma and respiratory problems. It's really bad to breathe in, so we care about that. So we had excess pollution because of non-compliance. So it's important for us to require then some projects to offset that past pollution so that going forward, the communities that were affected by it can have cleaner air going forward. So the mitigation piece, I think, is important. And then third is something that I keep coming back to, which is improving public health outcomes is really the guiding principle for a lot of what we do. And it's a guiding principle for the Cummins case too. We're interested in compliance with pollution laws and mitigating past harms because we want to improve public health outcomes for people.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. The interesting thing that you've started to touch on is that environmental enforcement is sort of evolving, right, over time, and the traditional penalties may not be what, as from a governmental perspective, are applied moving forward. How do you see tools, technologies like data analytics, satellite monitoring, or even artificial intelligence affecting how the DOJ identifies and then prosecutes cases like this moving forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I'll give a boring answer and then a slightly more interesting answer. The boring answer is the DOJ answer, which is that so we're litigators, we're attorneys, we're litigating these cases. Absolutely, data analytics is a huge part of that. We're some of these cases are massive and involving, hundreds of thousands or millions of documents that we have to somehow get a handle on. We have to meet our discovery obligations if we're litigating a case in front of the courts. And so for DOJ, I don't know what the answer will ultimately be, but absolutely figuring out how new data analytics tools are going to help with that discovery process and that sort of document corralling process, and potentially artificial intelligence too, to help identify relevant documents, preserve those documents, share them with the other side, identify the other side's documents. Artificial intelligence may play a role in that process too. That's sort of boring. It's, again, interesting to me, maybe not interesting to other people. EPA is doing a lot more on the ground work, right? So EPA is doing a lot of the investigation work. They're building enforcement cases. They're doing their own enforcement that doesn't have to go to DOJ. But then they're sometimes referring those cases over to DOJ to litigate as well. And again, like, I don't know what the answer is, and I'm certainly not an expert on the EPA side of things. But I know for a fact they're going to have to figure out how something like AI might play a role in their enforcement efforts. Whether that's identifying communities that might have pollution issues, using AI to help identify communities that might have pollution issues, using AI to help identify facilities that probably need an extra look, that need an on-the-ground inspection that hasn't happened in a while. I know that that's something EPA is going to have to think about and figure out how it plays a role in their ongoing enforcement efforts and pollution prevention efforts. EPA also has cool new technologies and tools that they are working on all the time. I mean, EPA has a lot of subject matter experts they're chemists, they're air experts, they're geologists, they're physicists, they're all these things. And so they're always at the cutting edge of those more kind of nuts and bolts technologies too. What the new handheld air analyzer is that helps them do facility inspections, or what new modeling tools they can use to model air emissions from a facility and how that might, spread in a region. So EPA has a lot of cool new things that they're doing, cooler than DOJ, but.
Got it. You've talked about how the preponderance of environmental harm in these types of cases affect communities that are typically disadvantaged. You also said that you are the team is a litigation team. You're litigators. I did want to ask, and perhaps for the benefit of those who serve in roles similar to yours across government, what is the impact, or in your toolkit, of something like empathy or some of the softer skills that come into play as a litigator, as a negotiator in these types of instances?
Yeah, a couple ways to answer that, I guess. I mean, one is we are often in an adversarial position as litigators. Just structurally, we're in a position where we are on one side and we have a facility, likely a facility, or a company or a municipality or whatever on the other side, and we're in this adversarial position. And I think a lot of other lawyers think there's an intrinsic good in practicing law. That the legal system that we have set up, it works well, and there's something inherently good about practicing law, representing your client to the best of your abilities, and furthering their interests. Now, the cool thing about working for DOJ is that your client is the people of the United States. Your client is the United States, which is great, which is a great privilege when you're at DOJ and get to work on behalf of the United States. And so what that means is you really have to pay attention to the people who are actually impacted by the work you're doing, and that always has to be, like, I may be repeating myself, but it really is a guiding principle for what you're doing in your adversarial litigation. You're at each stage along the way, whatever little fight you're having in your litigation, you have to remember that, what's my overall goal here? Well, my overall goal is to get to some endpoint where there's a solution and something better for the community that's being affected by whatever matter I'm working on. The last thing I'll say is that if you're an attorney, and especially if you're a litigator, you know that there are jerks and there are not jerks, and you don't have to be a jerk to be a litigator. And I think that's another great thing about federal government attorneys, and especially DOJ attorneys who I worked with for 11 years, is they're great attorneys, and also great people who are willing to be collaborative and be problem solvers rather than problem creators.
Got it. No, it makes a lot of sense. It's I think, as you described it well, the adversarial nature of the job oftentimes makes it very easy to just bring the hard skills and the hard facts, figures, data to play. But oftentimes you need to lean on some of the softer skills to come to the outcomes that you're trying to get to collectively on the benefit of the U.S. citizen.
Right. And I think you're I mentioned this, but I found, like, most of the time in the job, you're really in problem solving mode, more than in, like, fighting mode, litigating mode. You're in problem solving mode. That there's some sort of complicated problem. It's gotten to this point because the problem is really complicated, and it's hard for people to figure out how to get past it. And so your job as a DOJ attorney who's marshaling a lot of federal resources, who has a huge team of people across the federal government and maybe state government too, is to try and put the puzzle pieces together and figure out what the solution is. And empathy plays a role in that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's so we talked a little bit about the past and the present. Let's talk a little bit about the future as well. Nick, as you think about where broadly environmental enforcement is going and where it will go over the next 5-10 years, are there one or two things that you envision changing or shifting as we move into the future?
When I look at the environmental enforcement section and the environment division at DOJ, I see a need. What I see happening is people working incredibly hard to carry out the mission with fewer resources than they previously had. And it's no secret that DOJ, like other parts of the federal government, is dealing with fewer resources, dealing with staffing shortages and just fewer attorneys that can work on these cases, and other budgetary constraints. And these are incredible attorneys that are getting up every day motivated by working for the American people, and they're doing a job that probably they turned down other opportunities that may have been higher paying, and they're doing it because they believe in the mission. And I have no doubt that they're going to continue to do incredible work. But they're going to have challenges because of those
Sure.
budget and resource constraints. So what I hope happens is that some of those budget and resource constraints and staffing constraints get lifted, and they have more resources and more tools to use. But I also think they're going to have to be creative in using the tools that they have to still get to some great outcomes. They're going to have to prioritize. They're going to have to come up with creative ways and efficient ways to continue doing some of the incredible enforcement work that they always do and are still doing. But I think the next 5 to 10 years, that's gonna be the challenge.
No, understood. Understood. What to that end, what guidance or recommendations you offer to your colleagues as they try to navigate, I guess, as I view it, as two somewhat distinctive, perhaps yet related aspects. One is securing the legal victory, and the other is ensuring lasting environmental progress or sort of achieving that objective. How can they reconcile that? Any thoughts on how to bring those together and make them a singular goal?
Yeah. Constantly, when you're working on a complex adversarial enforcement litigation specifically, it's so easy to get bogged down in the little fights along the way and the little issues that pop up along the way. And sometimes that causes you to forget what the goal is and what you're trying to get to in the end. And what your goal is better environmental outcomes, right? Like, so that's what you want is a better environmental outcome. And I think if you keep that goal in mind from the very beginning, then you might be able to let some things go along the way. You might be able to let that civil procedure fight go along the way because it's not really going to affect the final outcome. You might be able to let some small issue go because the big picture, it's not as important. And if you have an achievable beneficial environmental outcome that you can get to at the end, and that's your goal, and you don't let the other little fights along the way derail you, you might be able to get to that goal more quickly and more efficiently. And that's how I always viewed my cases, I guess, is that EPA would refer some action to us. We'd work together to figure out what do we really want in this case? Like what actually do we want in the end? Is how important is the penalty here? How important is mitigation? How important is some new pollution control device to go on at the facility? Let's figure that out. And then let's figure out how to most efficiently and quickly get to that point, because you don't want to waste resources and time, and the longer it takes, also the worse it is for the community that's continuing to suffer from the pollution. So my philosophy was always have at the front of your mind the big picture goal, where you're trying to get at the end of the path, and problem solve along the way to get to that as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it's a tough, as you said, it's a tough job, especially in the current, being asked to do more with less. Some of those prioritization type considerations, that's wise counsel for them. We started our conversation, and the reason we're having this conversation is because you are a recipient of the Flemming Award. As you reflect on the Flemming Award, how do you think it is meant to, or how it will encourage and inspire future work within your group or your former group in the Department of Justice and beyond, to advance concepts like environmental justice?
Well, I'll say from my perspective, the reason I was, one of the reasons I was very excited to receive this award, very proud of it, is that I knew already some of the attorneys at DOJ who had received it in the past. So folks like Beth Engel, Steve Shermer, Laura Toms. Those were attorneys that had been recipients of the Arthur Fleming Award in the past, and I knew firsthand how incredible they were as attorneys, and like the amazing things they were able to accomplish, and then the amazing things they've been able to go on and continue to do in their careers. And so that piece of it was really inspiring, and it means a lot. It means a lot to me, and I can tell you it means a lot to folks in our environment division at DOJ. It's a big deal, and it's a real source of pride, and it's something that I'm very proud to have done some work that led to it. I mean, the Cummins case was a huge team, and I was just one piece of it. But
Sure.
I'm very proud that I did some work that was recognized in the same way that that these other folks that I know of have been recognized in the past. And then this is a kind of an answer to that question, but it's a little bit different. But I think it also is it plays a role in the mentoring that happens in the federal government. I think that that recipients of the award are fairly early in their career. I think it's less than 15 years into their federal service career. They may have had a career previously, but they're 15 years or less into their federal government service. I think a lot of award recipients really try to pay that forward by being mentors to newer federal employees, and guiding them and trying to cultivate the kind of work ethos and innovation that leads to recipients getting the award in the first place, but cultivating that with the new crop of attorneys or other federal workers coming up. And I know that was my experience. I had great mentors at DOJ, and have really tried to pay it forward to the next crop of workers that's coming up.
That's right. That's a wonderful way to end. All right. Well, many thanks to Nick McDaniel for his candor, expertise, and vision today. And many thanks to the team behind the Flemming Awards and the National Academy of Public Administration for continuing to invest in our public sector leaders.
Thank you for joining us on Beyond Expectations. This podcast series is sponsored by REI Systems. At REI, we are reimagining government together. Until next time, keep believing in the power of innovation and public service.